Hello there and welcome to the Double Zero channel. We do just one thing on this channel, and that's to take these two D10 dice and see how long it takes to roll a double zero. Now, the hypothetical odds are 1 in 100. It can take a lot longer, but it can also be over in just a few different rolls. So what to do is write down your guess just now. All I ask is that you don't put the result in the comments, let other people watch the video and find out for themselves. There will no doubt be other things to explain as we go along, but let's crack on with roll number one. And that is an 8 and a 4. I'll announce each one as we go along. A 0 but a 2. The only result that matters is a double zero, so a nearly does not count. We will be keeping track of any other doubles, but that's mainly for fun. We continue. 6 and 3, and that's a 3 and a 5. And we have a 1 and a 4, and that's a 3 and a 2. We have a 2 and a 7, a 9 and a 1, and that's a 5 and a 7. We have a 6 and a 4 there, a 0 but an 8, and that's an 8 and a 5, a 6 and a 7, and we have a 6 and an 8. And that's a 0 but a 9, and a 4 and a 9. I know it's not crucial, but I just like to turn it round, make sure I'm announcing the right number. And that's an 8 and a 9. And we have a double 8, so that goes on the pile of doubles. We'd expect about 10 doubles on the way to 100. And that's a 5 and a 9. Hypothetical doubles, I should add. Real world situations are vastly different. We have a 0 but a 2. And that's an 8 and a 1. And we have a 5 and a 3. And that's a 1 and a 9. It's a 0, but it's also an 8. It's a 0, but a 5. And that is a 7 and a 9. That's a 2 and a 4. And a 6 and a 4. A 0 but a 5. A 0 but a 2. And that's a 1 and an 8. We have a 0 and a 1. And that's an 8 and a 1. A double 4. Second double of the session. And that's a 9 and a 5. We have a 7 and a 2 as a 0 but a 4. A 7 and a 2 and that's a 0 but a 4. We have a double 1 as we approach the 100th row. I'll explain more about that in just a second. A 9 and a 7, 5 and a 7, 0 but a 6, a 9 and a 4, and a 9 and a 4 again. Every 50 rolls, we make it a nice big one with two hands on the dice cup. Um, that's if we get to 100, because that's if we get to 50, sorry, because you never know when the double zero is going to appear. But if it does get to 50, we'll make it a big one. So 2 and a 1, an 8 and a 6. Just turning that round for clarity. And we have a 5 and a 1, an 8 and a 5, and the big one for 50 is a double 1, but not the double we're looking for. So we go on to roll 100, and that's a double 2. A 6 and an 8, and that's a 5 and a 6. That's a 1 and a 3. That's a 0, but it's also a 9. A 3 and a 6. That is a 3 and a 6 again. A 5 and a 6. We have a 1 and an 8. And that's a 3 and a 9. An 8 and a 6. A 0 but a 1. And that's a 5 and a 4. That is a double 5, becoming our sixth double of the session. And a 1 and a 9. Oops. That is 2 and a 6. And a 2 and an 8. That's a 0 but a 3. And a 0 but a 6. A 6 and a 7. And a double 8. That's a 4 and a 2. And we have a 0 but a 7. A double 3 comes our eighth double of the session. And that's a double 3, which becomes our ninth double of the session. 7 and 6. And that's a 5 and a 9. We have a 0 but an 8. And a 7 and a 2. 0 but a 9. An 8 and a 1. A 0 but a 6. Remember, we're only looking for double 0 to win the game. And that's a 2 and a 7. I said win there, but the prize is only really your satisfaction. Maybe one day when I'm like Mr. Beast, I'll be able to give away like £1,000 if you get it right. Hashtag not legally binding contract. Anyway, be quiet. That's a 0 and a 6. And that's a 1 and a 7. It's 5 and a 9. And it's a 0 and a 1. It's so close, but it doesn't count. That's a 3 and a 2. 2 and a 1. And that's a 0 but a 6. 5 and a 3. And that's a 7 and a 9. And a 7 and a 3. 2 and a 3. And that's a 4 and a 6. Coming up for roll number 100. And that again is a two-hander one. But we'll see what happens before then. And that's a double 7. Double 7. And that's a 2 and a 4. A 3 and a 7. And for roll 100, that is a double 4, but that is the best we can do despite the big shake there. So, like I said, the hypothetical odds are 1 in 100. We'll see how long it takes to actually roll a double 0. So as we continue on to 150, it's 5 and 8. That's a 3 and a 9. And we have a 0 but a 2. And that's a 0 but a 3. And a 0 but a 6. Sometimes the dice gods dice with us as well. An 8 and a 4. And that's a 5 and a 4. Oh, there we go. On this channel, there's very minimal editing, so if something goes wrong, like a dice going onto the ground, you will probably see it. So I'm just reaching under my seat here. I say seat, it is actually a step ladder. I know it's strange, but it's what I sit on. Can maybe go into it in a more in depth one day. However, we have dice to roll, so just just after 100. That's a 0 and a 7. Is 2 and a 6. And that's a 2 and a 3. And we have a 6 and a 9, a 7 and a 9, and that's a double 8. Sling that on the doubles pile. That's a 0 but an 8. Oops. And that's a 0 but a 1. Again, it's 1 away, but it's not close enough. And it's a 0 and a 9, 6 and a 2, and that's a double 3, 14th double of the session, and a 1 and a 3. And that's a 3 and a 7, 7 and a 4, and that's a 2 and a 1. 6 and a 2, and we have a 4 and a 2. 9 and a 9, so that is a double, 15th double there. And that's a 3 and a 4. And we have a double 6, a 3 and an 8, and that's a 5 and an 8. A 0 and a 5, and that's a double 8. And we have a 5 and a 6 there. And a 7 and a 3. And that's a 3 and a 4. A double 5. And a double 5 again. That's a 3 and a 5. And we have a 2 and a 5. A 0 but a 3. And a 7 and a 3. That's a 1 and a 9. 0 but a 5. And that's a 9 and a 7. 7 and 4. And that's a 7 and a 6. As we approach roll 150, we will do that one with 2 hands. But first, we need to get there. We have a 9 and a 7. That's a 1 and a 6. 0 but a 5. And that is a double 6 for our 20th double of the session and our third double hander of the session. Nice big shake and 0 but a 5. As we move on for roll number 200, we have a 0 but a 1, not close enough as discussed previously, and that's a 1 and an 8, and that's a 4 and a 2. We have a 6 and a 2. It's a 1 and a 4. We have a 3 and a 2. That's a 9 and a 6. And that's a 0 but a 4. A 0 but a 2. And that's a 7 and an 8. And we have a 4 and a 2. That's a 0 but a 2. And an 8 and a 6. That's a 0 but a 7. 4 and a 1. And that's a double 4. Sling another double on the pile. That is a 6 and a 9. And that's a 1 and a 4. A 9 and a 5. And we have a 4 and a 7. And that's a 4 and a 1. A 4 and a 3. That's a 1 and an 8. A 3 and a 7. Oops, there we go. And that's a 0 but a 7. A 5 and a 3. And that's a double 3. We have a 0 but a 5. And that's a 4 and a 2. And a 6 and a 7. We have a double 4. That on the pile. A 3 and a 6. And we have an 8 and a 6 there. That is a double 1. And that's a 9 and a 5. We have a 9 and a 0. And that's an 8 and a 9. 3 and a 1. That's a 5 and a 7. And a 3 and a 7. A 2 and a 3. As a 0 but a 3. A 5 and an 8. And that's a 3 and a 9. And a double 2. That's our 25th double of the session, and we're about to go to our fourth double hander for 200, but that is in just a moment. First of all, no, I'm not doing it early. I was tempted. A 4 and a 2. That's a 1 and a 5. We have a 9 and a 9. That's another double. 5 and a 6. And the double hander, the real double hander, is a double 3, but not the elusive double 0 we're looking for. So let's go on for roll 250. And that's a 2 and a 7. We have a 6 and a 2. And that's a 5 and a 4. And a double 5. Put that down there. That's a 3 and an 8. And a 3 and a 2. A 4 and a 1. And that's a 4 and a 9. A 7 and a 6. It's a 0 but a 7. Uh, excuse me, I'm sorry. A 7 and a 2, excuse me. Oof. Sorry about that. Minimal editing in this video, but I might put the volume down for that one. Where were we? Yes, just there. And that's a 3 and an 8. And we have a 3 and a 7. A 3 and a 2. And that's a 4 and a 7. 3 and a 5. And that's a 3 and a 4. We have a double 7. And that is an 8 and a 6. A 5 and a 7 there. And that's a 3 and a 4. A 2 and a 5. A 4 and a 3. And that's a 2 and an 8. And we have a 2 and an 8 again. A 3 and an 8. And that is a 6 and a 9. It's a 0, but it's also an 8. And that's a 2 and a 9. A 0, but a 5. That's a 3 and a 6. And a 0, but a 7. And we have a 6 and a 7. It's a 0, but a 6. That is a double 9, bringing us up to 30 doubles this session. It's a 0, but a 7. A 4 and a 9. And that's a 0, but a 2. a 3 and an 8, and that's a 0 but a 7, a 4 and a 1, and that's a 0 but a 4, and that's an 8 and a 4, and a 9 and a 2, a 3 and a 1, and we're approaching roll 250. We're going to have our next double hander in just a moment. But first, 8 and 7, and that's a 3 and a 6. That's an 8 and a 2, a 1 and a 2, and the two-hander is a 2 and a 3. So we carry on for roll 300. It's a 2 and an 8. That's a 0 but a 6. And that's a 0 but a 4. And we have a 4 and a 7, a 7 and a 9, and that's a 2 and an 8. A 4 and a 1, that's a 9 and an 8. And we have an 8 and a 1. A 7 and 5. And that's a 0 but a 2. We have a 6 and a 3. And that's a 4 and a 3. A 7 and a 3. A 6 and a 1. And we have a 5 and a 7. A 1 and 6. And that's a 7 and a 4. A 0 but a 1. And that's a 7 and a 2. We have there a 6 and a 3. And that's a 9 and a 3. A 1 and a 5. And that's a 2 and a 4. An 8 and a 6. And that's a 5 and a 9. A double 2, so we put that onto the pile. And that's a 4 and a 5. A 1 and a 6. And that's a double 1. Stick that downstairs. We have a double 6. Again, put that on the pile. And that's a 7 and a 6. And we have a 0 but an 8. And that's a 4 and a 2. And we have an 8 and a 7. That is a 9 and a 9, so that's a double. Oops, make that clearer. And that's a 2 and a 3. And we have a 2 and a 5. A 0 but a 2. And that's a double 7. 35th double of the session. And that's a double 2 there. Adding one more. So 1 and a 9. And that's a 1 and a 4. And we have a 1 and a 3. And that's a 6 and a 1. Coming up for the 300th roll, in which we'll use both hands. But first, it's a 0 and a 3. And we have a double 5. An 8 and a 3. That's a 5 and a 6. And for roll number 300, remember the hypothetical odds are 1 in 100, so it's taken a lot longer. We have our double 0 on exactly 300 rolls. Fantastic. And along the way, we encountered 32 doubles, which is roughly what we'd expect, roughly on par. So in this case, the hypothetical odds are out the window, but at least it's consistent with the doubles. Thank you so much for watching this video, and you take care.